Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight. Today is one of my all-time favourite monsters, and it was suggested first by C. Simpson 14, although a few of you have asked me to draw this creature. Today we're going to be talking about Gnolls. Now just a little heads up that this will get quite graphic. These are scavengers, these are meat eaters, and even if I wasn't excited about talking about them, it would still get pretty gross, pretty cannibal-y. So, just a warning to back out now if your sensibilities are strained by more meaty conversations. But Gnolls are some of my absolute favourite creatures because they act as a natural disaster, a force of nature, a tide of entropy in the middle of your D&D campaign, caring for nothing but to reduce civilizations to dust and ruin. In so many ways, they're the kind of infectious sprinting zombies from the 28 Days Later franchise. They are feared just as much as that in your D&D world. Scouting parties will often be sent out in search of Gnoll raiding groups by the leaders of their civilizations, whoever commands them, under false pretenses, because if they knew that they were looking for Gnolls, they would head in the other direction. Are that feared? They are the true, uncaring, unsympathetic hand of chaotic evil, and they make for absolutely brilliant campaigns. Gnolls were always intended to become a part of D&D, although they have changed drastically since their inception. Although we spell them G-N-O-L-L now, it's believed that they were initially inspired by the Gnoll, G-N-O-L-E, a creature, not some guy called Gnoll, although that was a popular name up until about the 80s. They were a creature from a story called How Nuff Would Have Practiced His Art Upon the Gnolls by Lord Edward Plunkett, the 18th Baron of Dunsany. What a title. And he wrote that story in 1912. It's a new one to me, but it's supposed to have been a tremendous influence on J.R.R. Tolkien. So there you go. In this story, he creates Gnolls, E-N-O-L-E-S, who are sinister stalkers and hunters who hoard gems and valuables. And although few notes are made about what they might actually look like, we know that in his vision of Gnolls, they had small red eyes that were faceted like gemstones. This clever and cunning sort of Gnoll inspired Gary Gygax before even the release of D&D. By the time that the White Box had been released in 1974, they had been fleshed out into quotes, a cross between gnomes and trolls, which sounds like an absolutely traumatizing union to me. And then again, by the time that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons came out, AD&D, that was printed in 1977, Gnolls, now spelt G-N-O-L-L-S, had evolved into the hyena humanoids who embody savagery over intelligence, the kind of Gnolls that we now know and love. The style that stuck until today found such fanatical adoration in players all across the world, including myself, that the Gnoll has ended up finding itself in all sorts of games and stories thereafter. First time I encountered a Gnoll, for example, was in the world of Warcraft, and in this world there were actually native inhabitants of Azeroth. They've often appeared in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. They were featured growing mushroom-like growths in their hair, but Gnolls, spelt G-N-O-L-E-S the original way, are present in things like Final Fantasy, where they appear more often like giant dogs than humanoids. The version of Gnolls that I adore is defined by the version described in D&D, specifically well described and depicted in 5e in 5th edition. If you want to read an awful lot about them, I recommend getting Volo's Guide to Monsters, because it has absolutely tons of information about Gnolls in there. In D&D, Gnolls are the spawn of a vile demon prince of slaughter and savagery called Yenogu. Y-E-N-O-G-H-U. Yenogu. Once long ago, Yenogu roamed the material plane before he was banished, and while he, or it, was here, carved a path of destruction in its wake. Attracted by the spoils of war were legions of hyenas, which famously, fairly or unfairly, have the reputation of being scavengers. As an interesting side note, spotted hyenas, the ones that are usually used as influence for Gnolls, are actually fierce hunters, killing 95% of the animals that they eat, and often drive off larger predators like lions and the creatures that they kill. Their reputation for eating carrion and scavenging corpses comes mostly from striped hyenas and from West African folklore, where hyenas are often a symbol for kind of dirtiness or chaos, and often immorality and bad practices. But either way, Yenogu never cared who it killed, it just thirsted for conflict and barbarity, and it had no need for the belongings or the flesh of the dead, which it left thousands of corpses just to rot, their blood soaking into the ground. But each body was a fitting meal for the hyenas, hot on its blood-caked trail. As the hyenas fed, demonic magics that festered and curdled within these corpses from their mere contact with Yenogu transferred into their bellies and transformed them inside out, the boiling rage of a god of slaughter changing and moulding them to better achieve their murderous potential in this blood god's image. From that moment on, the Gnolls were born, hideous humanoids who seek only to further their unknowing creator's will of a world brought to ash and blood. And the moment a Gnoll is born, it knows only one desire, which is to sate an unquenchable yearning for slaughter. They will often hunt in ever-growing packs and will mow down smaller prey first, just to sate their addiction for violence, if only for a second. Perhaps avoiding heavily armoured or tougher enemies entirely, especially those in an armoured barracks or a castle, for example, as their goals are never to achieve anything, certainly nothing greater than to kill more creatures. It doesn't matter about the quality of the target, they just need a quantity, they need more things to die. Specifically intelligent creatures. Gnolls need to feast on the flesh of intelligent creatures to be granted even a few seconds of peace. They will often lash out at beasts, almost as a placebo, to feel some kind of facsimile or imitation of their kills to come, but it won't actually help them. It won't quiet their minds. They may kill a beast and savour the blood soaking their fur, the heat of it, on their arms, as an appetizer before finding an intelligent creature to devour and gnaw on. But their mindless addiction only abates briefly when the flesh of another intelligent creature is in their mouths. Every second that passes thereafter will cause a Gnoll to feel their heart pound in their chest like a jackhammer, for beads of sweat to drip as freezing splinters down their backs. They'll find their vision blur and their hands shake uncontrollably, and their throats will dry. A panic attack will set in, bringing them to their knees, crumpled on the floor. To be a Gnoll is to know no rest, to know no sleep, no order, no craft or passion. Instead, an endless quest to find the nearest creature to butcher and gnaw on. They are only propelled, even at their weakest moments, by that one fleeting desire. Gnolls will often scavenge their victims, putting themselves through absolute mental torture just to spend the time required to rifle through a dead man's belongings to find pieces of armour or weapons to make them more effective for when their next meal finds them. They're known for using bows, for example, but not to preserve themselves as they hide at long range, but rather to wound fleeing villagers, to pin someone to the ground, only to make them easier and a quicker target for their horde of brethren to take down, as a lion might treat an infant gazelle that can't quite keep up with the herd. These almost never-resting creatures are not cursed to live eternally, though, through their addiction. Their lifespans last only about 30 years on average. With their minds solely focusing on their next murderous fix, they can't spare any concentration to procreate. Instead, Gnolls are produced in a very strange way. Those that offer enough slaughter to please their patron prince are rewarded by its demonic magics in return, and are transformed into what's called Fangs of Yenogu, possessed by a fraction of this creature's malevolent spirit. After which point, if a hyena, one of the perhaps many hyenas that follow a pack of Gnolls, feast on a corpse left behind by one of these Fangs of Yenogu, their stomachs will begin to bloat and descend, expanding to the point that the poor creature will no longer be able to move. A few hours or days of agony later, a fully grown adult Gnoll will burst forth from this creature's stomach, fur matted in the insides of its unknowing cocoon, baptized in its blood, and its endless hunger will then begin. Sometimes even after death, a Gnoll's cruel service to Yenogu is not yet done. If a Gnoll finds itself alone and starving, unable to take down some enemies by itself, if it's not strong enough alone to end its torment after a fight that saw its pack slaughtered, it may attempt to beseech its maker using a language that they know, called Gnoll. It's constructed of fevered barks and yelps, this chittering laughter that hyenas are famous for, and a few small worlds of abyssal infused into their addled minds through the demonic energies that made them. Either way, a Gnoll may call out to its god, who may return its allies to life as what's called witherlings, necrotic husks of Gnolls who still act and hunger as they did in life, even if their stomachs have long since rotted away. Despite their hunger and purely chaotic alignment, they do have a kind of hierarchy though. There are many different kinds of Gnolls aside from the traditional ones, the Fangs of Yeenoghu and the Witherlings that I've discussed prior. There are also hunters, who can calm their minds just enough to act with stealth and precision, picking off isolated enemies using ranged weapons. And there are also flesh gnawers, who have adapted for speed, as their lust to scavenge often sees them fall behind the rest of the pack. They get entranced with scavenging and gnawing on bones, only to need to catch up to be the first ones back in the fight as soon as the thick of combat begins. There are also pack lords, who have lived for so long with their addiction that they have managed to focus themselves just enough to direct the herds of the pack and see the value in the greatest weapons, and perhaps even to use magic items to make their lives easier and to make their struggle against their addiction slightly minimized. Some pack leaders claim such glory and gore in the name of Yeenoghu that their demon god will bless them with transformative powers, causing them to grow larger and stronger. These beasts are called flinds, wield demonic weapons that imitate their god's own spiked flail. The symbol of Yeenoghu is a 3-chained flail. But a flind may pick up skulls from the fallen, and in their hands, a tether of psychic smoke will bind the two skulls together, causing demonic spikes to erupt from the heads and forge them into a weapon which paralyzes their foes with magical power, allowing the flind and its pack to devour those unlucky enough to be struck with its spell. Contrary to this, hyenas in the real world have a very rigid social structure and are incredibly clean creatures. In hyena clans, females and their cubs have the highest social status and have access to the highest quality of food and sleeping locations. Possibly to promote genetic diversity, the females rarely mate with the males of their own pack, which causes the males to often leave to find other packs to join, but rather fighting for control in their new pack or to gain dominance when they find one, are immediately forced to the bottom of the new clan's social structure, possibly only given the scraps of food the others of the clan don't want, if any remain at all. Generally speaking, the females in hyena society are much larger and stronger than the males, and are seen as more of a priority for survival for the pack. As a result, the males have pretty much no means of rising in social ranks, unless a new member joins, or if an older male dies. But even then, the most preferred male will never hold the same decision-making power or influence as the lowest ranking female hyena. It's unusual to see such a strong matriarchy like this in the mammalian species, but then hyenas are pretty unusual to begin with. A few of you pointed out when I mentioned them briefly in my Monster Monday on Blink Dogs, that despite their appearance, hyenas don't actually belong to any families of big cats or dogs, but rather they have their own family of 4 species, making it one of the smallest biological families of mammals. And they have traits of both cats and dogs. They're more genetically similar to cats, but their statures and behaviour, their propensity to catch prey with their teeth for example, as a wolf might, rather than their claws as a tiger might, is what's known as convergent evolution. They do things like scent mark, groom each other, they have clans like cats, but in all other respects pretty much they behave and look more like dogs. So both hyenas and gnolls are really weird, but they're absolutely fantastic monsters. So I hope you enjoyed this one too. Let me know down in the comments if you've used gnolls recently, or if your party has come up against a band of gnolls in a particularly memorable encounter, because I really love hearing about them. As well, if you have any suggestions for creatures that you'd like to see me draw in future Monster Mondays, make sure to leave those down below. I do have a massive to-do list of suggestions that you've all asked me to draw and to research, and I'm getting through them in the order that I've been asked them. There's a bottomless list of monsters, so if you have one that I've not heard of, I'll make sure to add it to the list. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave it a little like or a little thumbs up down below, maybe favourite it, and share it with someone who you think might like to learn about gnolls. If you want to see more stuff like this, I post 2 videos a week, so make sure to subscribe to get the most out of the channel. Everything like that really massively helps the channel to grow. We hit 5,000 subscribers not too far back, and it's only with your help that we're growing the way that we are, so thank you so much for your help. If you really love this drawing in particular and you'd love a copy for yourself, please make sure to head over to my Patreon page, where you can support the channel financially, which helps me to make better videos and improve the tools that I use and the amount of time that I can dedicate to this. But in return, as a thank you for this, I offer a bunch of rewards for people who pledge at different levels, including one of the levels. You can get this print and all the other Monster Mondays that I do this month as prints, either physically or digitally. Anyway guys, thank you so much for joining me as we explored Gnolls. Happy monster hunting, and until I see you next time, have a good one.